Hi, my name is Andre, and my call sign is Papa Yankee 2 Kilo Golf Bravo. This video is just a HF introduction for new amateur radio operators. I'm recording this video to a friend of mine, but I'm going to live here on YouTube, so maybe it's useful for someone else. Also, do not take everything I say here as absolute truth, because I might just be wrong, and it's good as well for you to do your research and your experiments as well, right? That's part of the hobby. Okay, so to start, if you're just in VHF and UHF, the 2 meters and 70 centimeters band, when you switch to HF, the thing that I think is the strongest difference between these two modes, these two bands, is basically the mode that you're going to use to transmit. For 2 meters, you're basically using FM, and for HF, we mostly use SSB. And there is some differences on the SSB. When you're using 2 meters, you're using the type of wave propagation that we call ground waves, which is basically the signal leaves your antenna and goes through the surface of the Earth and is spreading, right? This is fine. It works pretty well when the distance is short. When you change to SSB, what happens? You start to use the sky wave, right? Basically, the signal leaves your antenna, hits the ionosphere, and then bounces off, right? If the ionosphere is charged, right? If it's loaded with electricity here, the ionosphere, the signal will bounce back to Earth, and if not, it is just going to get lost in the space, right? And also, in using ground waves, the in your range you have no dead zones in here, right? As soon as you're covering the range of your the contact that you want to the person that you want to talk to, there's no dead zones here. But in HF there might be, right? For example, this area here, right, is a big dead zone because your signal will go up to the ionosphere and bounce back. So this zone here would be the zone that you cannot hear people talking from, and you cannot they cannot listen to you as well. So this is a dead zone, and this depends on the frequency, right? For 28 megahertz, it's like let's say 400 kilometers, 700 kilometers is a dead zone, and then you start to reach the frequencies, the contacts, right? You start to land on the surface of the Earth. Yeah, sorry for my kind of a broken English. So, this is two things that you have to be aware. And we depend much more on propagation, right? As we need the ionosphere to be charged. Uh, yeah, we basically depend on this. This might not be true in all the cases, but basically when you need the ionosphere, you're going to need sunlight, right? What I mean by this, let me see if I can find an image here. One second. Sunlight map. Okay, this one is perfect. Let's take this one here. Can I open it in big screen? No, I can't. So let's zoom here. Okay, so let's say we are in 28 megahertz. 28 or 14 megahertz, and we are here in Canada, right? So we would be able to probably reach stations like more or less here, right? Because this area here is still charged. The ionosphere around here would be charged here as well, right? So your signal would go to the ionosphere and bounce in that direction, or not only that direction, right? It could just bounce off the ionosphere and reach Spain, bounce off the ionosphere, reach the United Kingdom, ionosphere, Africa. You see? But one thing that you would not be able to do is bounce off here, reach here, right? It's not possible. You would have to do the other side of the Earth, like what we call a long path or short path. You would take a shortcut. Let's say you want to reach this region here, right? You would point your antenna to north, then would bounce here and end up here, right? You see how this thing works, more or less. Okay, so for the ionosphere to be charged, you need sunlight, and the basically what this means in the practical world is that depends on the time of the day that you're talking, the region you're going to hit, right? When you met me, Philippe, it was like 6:30, right? PM. So I would be listening. I was actually listening to stations in this area here, like Eastern Europe and Italy. Some things here, some things here as well, right? At this time of the day, it's also possible to hear stations in South America. It's pretty easy. The Caribbean as well, all of because of the sunlight, right? Okay, so this is pretty cool, right? Uh, it's not always true. It's true for most of the frequencies. For example, the HF band starts in 1.8 megahertz to 30 megahertz, right? When you start to get up to, let me open WebSDR here. Victor Echo 2 WebSDR. Let's see if it's easy to find. No. Quebec SDR. Yes. Okay, so let's look at this guy here.
Ouais. Pour que ce soit moins dangereux, là. La petite
Yeah.
qui était à base, à bord de cette
Québécois.
ça a manqué de batterie.
So let
Fait
me
que,
just
elle bloquait
mute.
tout le chemin. Puis,
Where do I mute
les
this
bons
here?
Samaritains qui l'ont poussé, les gars,
Sorry, it's
ils
all
devaient
on,
pomper un
on
peu du
real time
cardio
here.
parce qu'ils
Here.
ont quand même.
Okay, should be fine. You see, so the spectrum goes to from 30 megahertz up to, let's say, 1.8 megahertz, something like that, right? So in this range here, more or less like this, in this range here. Oh, let me use this thing here to draw, right? In more or less this range of frequencies, you would need the sunlight. And for this other guys here, it starts to be ground waves, but they are a bit different of the 2 meter ground waves that you use, right? So you're going if when you start listening, you're going to realize this is mostly long distance contacts, right? And depends on the sunlight. So basically means that during the day you'll be able to hear stuff on these bands here, and in these guys here during the night because the propagation on the other bands, they just go away and people start migrating to these frequencies here because uh, because these frequencies use the ground waves. And let's do something pretty cheap here, but I guess it's easy to understand. It's not exactly this, but let's say you have a building here, right? Your 2-meter ground wave is like this, and it's not going to pass the building, right? It's going to stop in the building, the signal is gonna die. What happens when you go to like when we call like 3.5 megahertz, which is 80 meters? Let's say you have a building here, right? And your wave is like this, so it goes over the building and is able to land somewhere else here. So it reaches further, right? Might not be exactly this way, but this is a good way for you to understand what is the difference between the ground waves on 2 meter and the ground waves on 80 meters, right? So this is it. So let's go next for equipments. Okay, just one more thing before going to the radios. You don't actually, for listening HF, you don't actually need to have a radio because nowadays they have this beautiful thing here called WebSDR. WebSDR.org is one of the main websites that they have a list of web SDRs. And if you scroll down to the bottom, you're going to see the map, and you can pick a web SDR in all these places here, right? Let's see, there is one in Washington. Washington. This is the one, yeah, this is a pretty good one. So we go to a web SDR.
Until midnight, then mostly clear after midnight.
And we can listen to
Northwest
HF.
winds 10 to miles an hour
Oh,
with
this is
gusts
just
up to
6
25
meter.
miles an hour.
Let me go on
Chance of
November
rain 50%.
Alpha 5 Bravo.com.
Mostly.
Settling type of game where this is
And
what happens.
here we are. HF. You can just go on the bands, listen to people. Right. In 7 megahertz. It's normally LSB that they use. And you can see what happens.
Way beyond amateur radio too. I'm with you on that.
Normally on the start of the bands, right, the 40 meters start on 7 megahertz, you're going to see CW. Right. You see that 7 megahertz is full of signals because it's night, right? During the day it might not be this much. And then after the CW portion of the band, right? CW portion here, you start to have the digital modes, right? You see just by the signal you can see that it's a digital mode. If we go here, see? After the digital modes, you're going to, I think here it's still digital mode, more or less here.
Sound good over here in Virginia. I'm about 50 miles south of Washington, D.C.
Just after the digital modes, normally there is a frequency interval that, let me just draw, that is more like a DX, like for people to do long distance contacts. So if you're looking to find people from far away, you would be going more or less here. And then this frequency here would be this range. would be more like a local context. You're going to hear a lot of United States, Canada in this part here, right? Again, this is not a rule, right? But this is what you will realize listening to frequencies. For example, 20 meters. 20 meters starts in 14 megahertz. There is a block that is CW. Whoops, too large. There's a portion of the band that is CW. Right, you're going to see another part of the band that is digital. Then you're going to see a part for DX and another part for more local conversation as you want. You see? This is not a rule, but this is normally what happens on these frequencies here, right? So make use of this websdr.org, websdr.org. You can just scroll down to the bottom, or you can just use the filter here and get some stuff. Looking at the antennas is a pretty good uh, indication. For example, this guy here, it's a Yagi 3 elements. It's a pretty good antenna, so this would be. Oh, it's close to my home, to where I use it to live in Brazil. So basically here you would be listening some pretty good DX here. Pretty good station to connect. And this is a good thing for you to make use of. So let's talk about equipment. In equipment, uh, you might, as a beginner, you may want it's better to have a 100 power radio that is able to output 100 watts, right? Because QRP are small radios that they output a maximum of 5 to 10 watts, depends on the model, and it might be painful. It's a bit frustrating when you're like you hear a station and you keep calling, giving him the calls, but the person will never answer because he doesn't listen to you, and you're listening to him pretty well. It might get a little frustrating. You need some experience to be able to enjoy QRP, because then you will understand a bunch of things that is happening on the frequency, on the propagation, to go for the right moment to call. Right? This is exactly why QRP is frustrating but also awesome, right? So for radio, right now, as of 2022, the most popular radio in the world, and it's popular for a pretty good reason, because it packs a lot of pretty good and awesome features with a pretty good price, right? Yes, it's expensive, but for the features it has antenna tuner, means that you can use an antenna that's not so good, and you can tune with the radio to make it usable, which is like in North America, where there is the homeowners association that prevents you from putting up a bunch of antennas. You end up putting like a dipole antenna, so it's able to stay there without them complaining. So the antenna tuner is like pretty important here in North America at least. So this is one I would definitely recommend you to research. This is by far the most popular radio in the world right now, and there's a pretty good reason for that. And yes, this one. A second HF radio, if you're more like a portable guy, would be this guy here, FT8921 from Yaesu, right? The price is even better. But here you're going to understand why the IC 7300 is just better. It doesn't come with antenna tuner, right? The like just the panel here, you see it's pretty easy to understand, right? Why one is way easier to use. You can place SD cards here, you can't, a bunch of stuff. So this might be an option. It's actually one option that many people pick because this is a smaller radio, means that you can carry around easily, right? Uh, they don't suggest. But normally you would then, as it doesn't come with antenna tuner, you will be probably buying one antenna tuner, which is more or less $300, right? So it starts to get pretty close to the price, right? So, but this is a pretty good option as well. And having these radios, you need a power supply, right? Power supply for a radio that outputs 100 watts, you will need 30 amps, right? It's normally always 13.8 volts with 30 amps would be enough. Actually, 20, 25 amps would be able to output 100 watts, but having one of this is pretty good, right? There's many options out there. You can go to Radiolity, just make sure that they have 30 amps and this voltage here, and you should be good, right? And now the QRP. The one I chose is this one, the Zygo X5105. Uh, in QRP, there are many options. This radio I thought should be the one that it's like the 17300, right? It's the one that packs the most features with the best price, right? There is the new version of this guy here, which is the 6100. You see that the panel, the display is way better. There are some new features here. It's now actually a Linux. It's a SDR, which means that this radio runs a Linux, right? But it's a bit more expensive, right? I decided to go for this one because this radio is on the market for a pretty long time, and people they all have a pretty good opinion on this radio. All the owners they're pretty satisfied with this radio, right? But the king of the QRP would be the Elecraft. Sorry, one second. Sorry, would be the Elecraft the KX series, right? KX2 or KX3 are pretty good radio. The KX2 is smaller. The KX3 is a bit bigger. Um, but when buying, you gotta be careful to add the antenna tuner, the batteries, and a bunch of stuff. So to get a Elecraft radio with the same features that you have here, you're going to spend um, 1500 US dollars to more to get a radio like this that is like this is in Canadian dollars, but it's about 500, 600 dollars, right? But this radio is awesome. It's awesome, right? And to go with these radios, you're going to need a battery, right? Yeah, my radio it has an internal battery which lasts like a lot. It's pretty good. The battery in this radio. This model as well, the KX is pretty good battery as well. But when you're out there doing some DX and if you run off out of battery, it's a bit annoying. So you might want one of these batteries here. The ones I recommend, all the if you YouTube the batteries for ham radio equipment, you're going to find the Bioenno. Um, for example, for a QRP radio, these two here would be good, right? I actually bought this one here, and I'm waiting for it, right? If you had like if you want to take your 7300 or oops, one of these two radios out, right, for some activities outside, you might want something with 15 these guys here, right? See, 30, 30, 20, 15. This would be the batteries that you should be looking for. Could be even less if you don't want to transmit full power. It should be fine to use like a 12 amp. It's pretty would do pretty well, right? So those are the batteries that you would want to look for. Bioenno Power. It's pretty good batteries. So now let's talk about antennas. Let me just cut the video here 1 second. So let's talk antennas. So for HF, the best antenna you can get is a Yagi. It's a directional antenna. It's not actually a Yagi, it's a cubic antenna. But the cubic antenna, let me show you. Okay. Quad cube antenna. Let's see. Yes, this is actually the monster of the antennas, but it's also the monster on your house as well, right? Yeah, not pretty good, right? But this is actually the most powerful antenna. But the other option would be Yagi antenna. This antenna here, three element, three band Yagi. Let me zoom here. Three band would be like ideal. It will give you three bands. These are pretty good bands for DX. I mean, if you want to DX, this is pretty good bands. 20 is the best bands. 10 and 15 pretty good as well. So you have a pretty good antenna for three bands, right? Uh, when buying, just make sure they are, let me see if then they mention here. Uh, no, they don't, but I can explain. So you see these things here? It's hard to see because there is one here and one here. Let me make this just a bit bigger. One here, one here, one here, one here, one here, one here. These are radio frequency traps, right? Because this part of the antenna here is for 10 meters. This other part here is for 15 meters, and this length is for 20 meters, right? What happens here is that when you have a trap, what is a trap? A trap is like a coil thing that doesn't allow the RF to continue on the wire, but just for a certain frequency. So let's say this is a RF for 28 megahertz, meaning that the radio frequency will go here, hit this part, and just die. Will not continue this in this direction here in the antenna, but only for 28 megahertz. And then let's say this is 15, right? The radio would see the antenna this length and would go here. This part here is dead for the radio, only for 15 meters, the 21 megahertz frequency. And then here would be 20. For 14 megahertz, the radio would see the antenna in its full length, right? because it would ignore the traps. This is more or less, this is a good subject for you to YouTube about. Type this on YouTube. There's a bunch of people explaining radio frequency traps. So this would be the ideal antenna. Not this mod, not exactly this model, but a YAG antenna, 3 band, and a trapped antenna, right? Um, but here in North America, I realized there you cannot just install a huge antenna in your home, right? So you might end up going for dipole antennas, or the one that I use, and it's pretty common here in North America, end-fed antenna, right? I suggest you to YouTube that as well. There's a bunch of people explaining. The dipoles are always best for you don't lose RF, but the end-fed antenna is more practical to install, right? And yes, there's pretty, you can find them or you can make them. It's pretty easy to do, right? Uh, if you have some good cash, I would suggest you to buy chameleon antennas, because they're pretty good. If you Google them, you're going to see that most of the reviews are pretty good, and they are aware of this thing here, which in Canada is important, right? Because if you put an antenna outside that doesn't support really low temperatures, we might have a problem, right? You might have problems with SWR and yeah, SWR, the antenna, the wires might get damaged with the cold, and there might be a problem, right? So you can buy the antenna already made, or you can build your own, right? There are kits all around, right? If you go on Amazon, there's people selling the match Unity, but there are people selling the kit for you to build end-fed antennas as well. It's these antennas are pretty easy to do. The ones I use, I could build, but I found that it's just cheaper to buy one, right? Um, this is one that I use. It's 20 bucks, right? I don't know if you've seen this before, right? This is an 40 to 10 meter antenna. You can use in many bands, and you just need a tuner. It will work fine. And if you don't have a tuner, there is an antenna plus is even better because it comes with the tuner in the antenna, right? It's always better to use the tuner already in the antenna. And there is a no tune and fed half wave that I also have. But these are mono bands. You cut the wire for just one range of frequency, right? So these are my tips for antenna. And for antenna, if you're going to make your own antenna, there is one guy that is network vector analyzer. That's called on Amazon. You find it pretty easy. Nano VNA, right? These are more expensive, but you can find these guys here, 85 bucks, stuff like that, that you can use to measure the SWR of your antenna. It's pretty good if you're making antenna. It's pretty good to have this one. It's pretty cheap. Uh, there are some others that are better, but they're like $500. No way, right? Or if you have the cash. That are specific for amateur radio, but these ones they do the job just fine. Nano VNA, if you're going to be building your antennas, it's a good equipment to have as well. So I guess that's all. We covered pretty good chunk of all the stuff you're going to need, the basics of what HF is. the hobby will switch to talking to people more towards doing long distance contacts, confirming them, or if you prefer just using HF to talk to people a bit further, like in the US, it's fine as well, right? As soon as you're having fun, that's the goal of the hobby. And that's it. It's a pretty simple video, but I hope it's useful. Thank you. See you.